William Lee is the Chief Economist at Global Economic Advisors and at the Milken Institute. He joins me now from Henderson, Nevada. Appreciate you being with us.
Thanks for having me, Rosemary.
So stocks surged on news of the quarter-point interest rate cut, the Fed's third straight cut this year. But President Trump said it should have been double that. Your response?
Actually, Chair Powell made a very good case for why it should be double that. When he was saying that the overshoot on inflation was coming mainly from tariffs, he didn't quite tell you what the whole picture was. The service sector inflation without tariffs would have left this inflation measure somewhere around 2.25. He said the low twos, but the actual number is 2.8. So there's very little inflation that the tariffs are pushing into the system, and that's going to be gone within 9 months, which is well within the lag time of monetary policy. On the other hand, he was telling us that employment growth was not only slowing, it was negative. There was actually a loss of jobs over the last month or so. And I think that's something that's very worrying. And I think that's the case that Governor Myron is making for a much larger rate cut. And those who are arguing and worrying about inflation and hiding behind the cloud of uncertainty and the lack of data are really fighting last year's war.
Oh, that's interesting, because I was going to ask you that as my next question. You've got Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell blaming Trump's tariffs for this country's high inflation. The president rejects that, and you're pretty much rejecting that as well, from the sounds of it.
Well, I just asked to look at the numbers. When he said that without the tariffs, the inflation would be in the low twos, and the actual PCE deflator, the personal consumption expenditure deflator, which is the price of measure that the Fed targets, the last measure we got was 2.8. So if you think where the difference is, that's a very small amount of inflation that's accounted for by tariffs, very much lower than a lot of the warnings that economists gave you that, we're going to have this massive inflation, massive stagflation, and all these disasters that were being predicted. It just didn't come about.
Interesting. And I did want to ask you, though, is there enough economic data available to make any real assessment of where the US economy stands right now? Because, of course, there was the government shutdown and there's been a bit of delay in getting all of that economic data. And how would you describe the state of the US economy right now?
As the data are trickling in, we have this strange phenomenon where GDP growth is now currently measured for the current quarter, something like 4% growth, which is extraordinarily strong. But on the other hand, you see employment, and every measure of employment, whether it's job growth or layoffs or hiring or the number of job openings, hiring is extraordinarily slow. The number of job openings is starting to grow a little bit. But again, if you're a new person coming out of school or someone who's just been laid off, you're having a harder and harder time finding a job. And that's something where the Fed's mandate for full employment, in fact, not just full employment, maximum employment, really comes home to roost. And if you want the growth to continue, and 70% of GDP growth is coming from consumption, people have to have the money to support themselves and to spend, and that means jobs. But when job creation is negative, that's a problem. And Chair Powell pointed that out repeatedly.
Right, and of course, so many Americans are feeling a lot of economic pain right now, aren't they? When will the average American start feeling any measure of relief from this interest rate cut?
The ray of optimism that Chair Powell had during the press conference was productivity. He said for several years now, productivity growth has been extraordinarily high, well over 2%. And that's very good news, because the more productive the worker is, the more he's paid or she's paid. And I think that's the message I think that everyone should take home, which is to say, the more productivity that is put into the economy, whether it's through technology, AI, or any of the innovations that we've seen in the post-COVID era, that is a good news for higher wages in the future. What we have to worry about right now is that the cost of living, prices are just so high. Well, high prices when inflation is slowing means that it's the accumulation of all the massive inflation we had over the last 5 years. That is what's causing prices to stay so high, and that disinflation is still very slow. And that's the tension I think that everyone is feeling. 90% of the population, or rather, most workers, 90% of the wealth in this country is held by the top 10%. And the top 10% is doing quite well, and they're spending like crazy. The business class fares are going up. The business class seats have disappeared. But people who are working paycheck are living paycheck to paycheck. And I think that's where this K-shaped economy, as some people call it, is a sign of social stress. and a real social problem that policymakers have to address.
Yeah, it's that great divide, isn't it? William Lee, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate your analysis.
Thanks for having me.